The glass was halfway to his lips when the small hand closed around his wrist. Ethan Crawford froze. He had been standing at the kitchen island the way he always did on rainy mornings, still in his dress shirt, tie not yet knotted, the gray light pressing flat against the tall windows of his estate. The orange juice was freshly squeezed, the same as every morning. Still cold. Still bright. Still placed exactly where Vanessa always left it, right beside his vitamins, right beside his phone. He had been about to drink it the way he had drunk it every single morning for almost 2 years. Then the hand. He looked down. It was Nia. 11 years old. The daughter of his housekeeper, Mrs. Adiz Okafor. The girl spent her afternoons here after school while her mother finished her shift, usually quiet in the corner with a book or helping fold napkins. She never spoke to Ethan directly. She barely made eye contact. She was the kind of child that adults forgot was in the room. Her eyes were wide and very still. Not the eyes of a child who had done something wrong. The eyes of a child who had seen something she was not supposed to see and had been carrying it alone for longer than she should have. "Please don't drink it," she whispered. Her voice was barely a sound. "She's been poisoning you for months. You just never noticed." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. He did not move. He did not lower the glass. He did not look at Vanessa, though he felt her presence behind him shift. A small, careful movement that he would replay in his mind many times in the weeks that followed. What he noticed in that one suspended moment was that he could not immediately tell himself the child was wrong. He wanted to. He opened his mouth to do exactly that. But something stopped him. Something that had been sitting in the back of his chest for months, quiet and nameless, finally moved. He set the glass down on the counter. Fully. Without turning around. And the morning changed. Ethan Crawford had built his company from nothing. That was not a story he told at dinners or printed in magazine profiles, though journalists tried to make it one. It was simply the truth. His parents had died when he was 22. His father first, a heart attack without warning, his mother 3 months later in a way that the doctors called natural but that Ethan had always quietly understood was grief. He had inherited a modest house and a modest amount of debt and a company his father had started that was bleeding money in 4 directions at once. He had fixed it. Then he had built something larger. Then larger again. By 35 he was worth more money than he had names for, and he lived in a 12-room estate on the edge of the city that he had bought because his financial advisor told him to put wealth into property and because the garden was large enough that he could walk in it in the mornings without hearing the street. He was not a man who made mistakes about people. He had been careful his entire adult life. He had watched others move too fast, trust too easily, let someone into the center of their world before they understood what that person was made of. He had told himself he was different. Vanessa Hale had arrived at a charity event 18 months before the rainy morning with the glass. She had been introduced by a mutual friend. A warm, easy introduction, the kind that does not feel like an introduction because it does not feel calculated. She was beautiful in a way that was not aggressive. She laughed at the right moments and fell quiet at the right moments, and when she asked Ethan questions about his work she listened to the answers in a way that made him feel, for the first time in years, like someone was actually interested in who he was rather than what he had built. They had dinner 4 times before he realized he was making plans around her schedule. He had never done that for anyone. She moved into the estate after 8 months together. By then she had already been spending most nights there anyway. It felt natural. She said it felt like coming home. He believed her because he wanted to, and because nothing she had done in 8 months gave him any reason not to. Within weeks of moving in she had quietly reorganized his routine. It started with small things. She began preparing his breakfast because she was up early anyway. She sorted his vitamin capsules each week because she said the multiple bottles on the medicine shelf were disorganized and she liked things tidy. She reminded him to eat lunch because she noticed he forgot. She took over communication with the household staff about meals because she said it was easier to manage from one point. He let her. He was grateful. Running a billion-dollar company across 3 countries left him little energy for the domestic architecture of his own life. And Vanessa managed it with a kind of cheerful efficiency that made the estate feel less like a building he owned and more like a place where someone actually lived. The headaches started around month 4 of living together. He attributed them to screen time and long flights. The chest discomfort began 2 months after that, and his doctor suggested stress, which was not an unreasonable diagnosis for a man who worked the hours Ethan worked. The memory lapses, Moments where a name or a word or the thread of a meeting would slip sideways in his mind. Arrived quietly and he told no one about them because he was 51 years old and he told himself this was simply what 51 felt like. Vanessa fussed over him in a way that felt like love. She reduced his schedule. She spoke to his doctor about his stress. She suggested he delegate more, rest more, let her handle the small things so he could focus on what mattered. He thought she was taking care of him. He did not know what care looked like from the outside when the inside was something else entirely. Nia Okafor was 11 years old and she noticed everything. It was not a skill she had been taught. It was something that happened to children who spent a lot of time in rooms where adults forgot they were present. Her mother, Mrs. Adiz Okafor, had worked for Ethan Crawford for 6 years. She was a careful woman, devoted to her work in the way that people are devoted when they understand exactly what is at stake. Her husband had passed 4 years ago. There was only Nia. The scholarship for Nia's school fees, the comfortable quarters at the edge of the estate, the salary that allowed them to live without the low-grade fear that had characterized the years before. All of it depended on this job. Mrs. Okafor knew it and made sure Nia knew it too. So Nia was quiet. She sat in corners. She helped her mother fold napkins and polish the silver frames in the hallway and carry the shopping from the delivery entrance. She did not speak to Mr. Crawford beyond a polite good afternoon when he noticed her, which was not often, because the adults in the house were busy and children in houses like this were furniture that breathed. She saw things. She saw which staff members took their breaks too long and which ones the cook did not like. She saw that the estate manager, Mr. Martin, sometimes stood in the garden at night near the back wall, which struck her as odd because it was cold and he did not smoke. She saw that Miss Vanessa smiled differently at Mr. Crawford when other people were in the room versus when it was only the two of them. Not the smile itself but the arrival of it, the way it appeared slightly too quickly, the way it landed and held for precisely as long as seemed correct and then left. Nia did not know what to call what she saw. She was 11 and she did not have language for performance. But she knew the difference between a feeling that arrived naturally and a feeling that was put on like a coat. What she saw in the medicine room she did not discover by looking for it. She was fetching a bottle of her mother's ibuprofen from the pantry shelf one night when she heard the soft sound of a door. The medicine room was off the back corridor, a small locked room that contained Mr. Crawford's prescriptions, supplements, and the organized shelf system that Miss Vanessa had set up 4 months ago. It was past midnight. Nia had come down quietly because she had a headache and she did not want to wake her mother. She pressed herself back into the shadow of the pantry doorway and watched through the gap. Miss Vanessa was in a silk robe. She moved like someone who had done this many times. No hesitation, no checking over her shoulder because she had already checked. She took a small tray of capsules from the locked cabinet, which meant she had a key, and she placed the tray on the counter beneath the dim under-cabinet light. She opened a capsule. She took a small clear bottle from the pocket of her robe and added 2 drops to the inside of the capsule before pressing it closed. She did this to 7 capsules in the same careful way. Then she replaced the tray in the cabinet, locked it, and put the clear bottle back in her pocket. Then she took out her phone. The voice was very quiet. But the pantry was very quiet too. He's getting weaker, exactly on schedule. Pause. Then, another 3 weeks should be enough. Then she was gone. Nia stood in the pantry for a long time after that. Her headache was still there. She had completely forgotten about the ibuprofen. She did not sleep that night. For 6 days she said nothing. She turned it over in her mind every way she could find, trying to find the version that meant something ordinary. She failed. She thought about telling her mother and then imagined her mother's face. The fear, the disbelief, the calculation of risk. And she understood that her mother could not be the one she told. Her mother had too much to lose and the courage required to lose it all. She thought about what would happen if she said it and no one believed her. She thought about what would happen if she said nothing. On the 7th morning, standing in the kitchen doorway, she watched Mr. Crawford lift the glass of orange juice toward his mouth, and she made the only decision that felt like a decision rather than a surrender. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and closed her hand around his wrist. The words came out of her in a rush, barely above a breath, because she was terrified and she needed them out of her body before she lost the nerve. When she finished, the kitchen was completely silent. Miss Vanessa turned around from the sink. The smile was already in place. "Nia," she said with a soft laugh that contained a specific kind of warmth. The warmth adults use when they are making a child feel small without appearing to. "Sweetheart." You've been watching too many crime shows with your mother. She looked at Ethan. I'm sorry. She's a little over-imaginative. Ethan set the glass down. He looked at Nia. He looked at the glass. He looked at Vanessa. It's fine, he said. And then he said to Nia without coldness, you can go help your mother. Nia moved toward the doorway. She stopped. She turned back one more time. Then ask her to drink it first, she said. Very quietly. And she left. Ethan stood at the kitchen island for a moment after she was gone. Vanessa was already talking. Something about the schedule for the afternoon, something about the dinner reservation she had made for Thursday, and the words moved around him like whether he was no longer standing in. He picked up the glass. He turned it slightly in his hand. He set it back down. I had a big breakfast, he said. I'm not thirsty this morning. Of course, said Vanessa. I'll put it in the fridge. She reached for the glass. He slid it sideways gently toward her. You drink it, he said. No point wasting it. The pause was very small. Almost nothing. Half a second, maybe less. But Ethan Crawford had spent 30 years reading rooms and reading people and reading the specific texture of hesitation, and he felt this one like a stone dropping into still water. I already had my coffee, she said. And I'm honestly a bit allergic to citrus. I've told you that, remember? And it has your supplement mix in it. The ratios are wrong for me. She smiled. She picked up the glass and turned to the sink and poured it away. Later that morning, Ethan sat at his desk on the third floor and did not open his laptop. He had been told he was getting weaker from stress. He had chest discomfort. He had headaches and memory gaps and a tiredness that he had attributed to aging and overwork and the specific exhaustion of a man who had been running at full speed since he was 22 years old. He thought about the way the glass disappeared into the sink. He picked up his phone and called Damian Ross. Damian Ross was not the kind of person you introduced at dinner parties. He was former military intelligence, quiet in the way that men become quiet when they have spent years operating in spaces where noise costs lives. He had left the service 6 years ago and built a private investigation firm that was small, selective, and very expensive. He and Ethan had served on a veterans charity board together for 3 years. They were not friends in the conventional sense. They were the kind of men who understood each other without needing to explain themselves. Ethan told him everything on the phone. The girl. The juice. The refusal to drink. The hesitation. And, for the first time aloud, all the months of symptoms that he had explained away to himself. Damian said very little. When Ethan finished, there was a short silence. Don't confront her, Damian said. Don't change anything. I'll be there tonight. They worked through the night. Damian brought 2 men from his firm and a forensics contact with laboratory access. They removed 12 capsules from the tray in the medicine cabinet and replaced them with identical-looking capsules containing nothing. They took the removed capsules to the lab. They installed 6 cameras. Microlenses, the kind that required close inspection to find, in the kitchen, the pantry corridor, and the medicine room. They placed microscopic tracking powder on the inside surfaces of the medicine cabinet so that any contact would leave an invisible trace on hands and sleeves. Ethan pretended to take his capsules in the morning. He pretended to drink the juice. He poured it into the sink when Vanessa was not watching, the way she had poured his juice away when she thought he was not watching. He moved through his days and said nothing and watched her the way he now understood she had been watching him, with a fixed, careful attention that showed nothing on the surface. On the second night of the cameras at 2:13 in the morning, Vanessa entered the medicine room. Damian called Ethan at 7 the next morning. We have her on camera, he said. And the lab results came back. There was a pause that Ethan felt in his spine. It's not a common substance, Damian continued. It's an experimental compound. Cardiotoxic. Slow-acting. It degrades naturally in the body within 72 hours, which is why it doesn't appear in standard blood panels. The effect on the heart is cumulative. Over time it presents as heart disease. He paused again. If it had continued another 4 to 6 weeks, a cardiac event would have looked entirely natural. Ethan sat with the phone against his ear for a long time without speaking. There's more, Damian said. She's not sourcing it herself. Someone delivers it. The delivery happened every Thursday night. A man in a grocery uniform left a small package inside the back garden wall. He never came through the front gate. He never appeared on the estate's exterior security cameras, because for exactly 4 minutes every Thursday between 11:58 and midnight 2, the cameras stopped recording. Someone inside the estate was disabling them. It took Damien's team 48 hours to trace it. Martin Webb had been Ethan Crawford's estate manager for 8 years. He was 53, methodical, precise, the kind of man who remembered where every spare key was kept and which contractors held current access codes. He had been with Ethan longer than anyone else on the staff. He knew the security system intimately because he had helped design the upgrade 3 years ago. Every Thursday night, Martin accessed the security panel in the maintenance room on the ground floor and manually overrode the back garden cameras for 4 minutes. Then he returned to his room. Then Vanessa collected the package. Ethan stared at the footage for a long time. 8 years. He had attended Martin's mother's funeral. He had given him a bonus when Martin's sister had medical bills. He had trusted him with keys to every room and code to every system in a building that contained everything Ethan owned. "Why?" he asked Damien. "I'm working on that," Damien said. "Give me another day." The answer arrived sooner than expected. Vanessa had noticed that Nia was still watching. Children are harder to fool than adults because they have not yet been trained to accept the polite surface of things as the whole truth. Nia had been quieter since the morning of the juice, but quiet and absent were not the same thing, and Vanessa was not a woman who missed details. First she brought Nia a gift. A small tablet still in the box left on the kitchen table with a note that said "Simply for you." Nia looked at it for a long time and did not touch it. She told her mother someone had left a package and her mother put it in the back room. Then Vanessa offered, in a warm and casual way, to speak to someone she knew about a private school scholarship for Nia. She mentioned it to Mrs. Okafor with the same ease with which she might mention the weather. Mrs. Okafor thanked her. Nia watched her mother's face and saw what was there. Then 3 days later Vanessa found Nia alone in the hallway. She crouched to Nia's level. Her voice was very gentle. Her smile was the smaller, private version, the one that did not perform. "You have such a good imagination," she said. "But imaginations can get people into trouble. Especially when those people have mothers who work in houses that belong to other people." She held Nia's gaze. "Your mother works very hard. I'd hate for anything to make her situation here more difficult. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Nia said yes. She kept her face very still. That evening she walked to Mr. Crawford's study and knocked twice on the door. She told him every word. Damien was at the estate within the hour. He removed a small audio recording device from a kit he carried and showed Nia how it worked. He attached it inside the front pocket of her school backpack where it would not be visible. He told her she did not need to do anything. She only needed to go about her day. If Miss Vanessa spoke to her again, the recorder would capture everything. Nia nodded. She did not tell him she was frightened because she understood that being frightened was not the same as being unable. 2 days later the recorder had captured 3 conversations. The first was a continuation of the threat in the hallway, softer this time, almost kind. The second was a phone call Vanessa made while standing near the garden where she apparently believed she was alone. She was confirming a timeline. She used the phrase "his heart should give out naturally," and she used it with the flat ease of someone reading from a list. The third was a conversation between Vanessa and Martin, in the kitchen at 6 in the morning while the rest of the house slept. It was this conversation that changed everything Ethan thought he already knew. Martin's voice was different with her. Not the careful, professional tone he used with Ethan. Something older. Unguarded. He called her V. She called him by a name that was not Martin. He called him Marcus. Damien ran the name. Took him 4 hours. Martin Webb's real name was Marcus Hale. He was 53 years old. He was Vanessa Hale's older brother. And 8 years ago, a company called Meridian Holdings had been quietly acquired by a larger investment group. The acquisition had triggered a debt restructuring that pushed several smaller companies into insolvency. One of those companies was a manufacturing firm called Webb Hale Fabrications, founded by a man named Gerald Hale. Gerald Hale had spent 22 years building it. He had lost everything within 6 months of the acquisition. He had died 18 months later from what his death certificate called a stroke, though his children might have used a different word. The company that had absorbed Meridian Holdings was a subsidiary of Crawford Capital. Ethan sat very still in his study when Damien read him this. "I didn't know," he said. "The Meridian acquisition, that was a fund-level decision. I wasn't personally involved in the subsidiary disposals. I know, Damien said. But she doesn't. Or she decided it didn't matter. Ethan thought about 18 months of mornings. 18 months of orange juice and vitamin capsules and a woman who touched his arm when he looked tired and reminded him to eat and told him she loved him before he left for work. He thought about the grief she must have been carrying from the day she walked into that charity event. He thought about what it costs a person to plan something like this. The patience of it, the years, the performance. And then Damien told him about the flash drive. It was what Vanessa had actually come for. The poison was not the plan. The poison was the clock. While Ethan's health declined and his concentration slipped and his presence in his own company gradually reduced, Vanessa had been systematically accessing the secure servers in his home office. Not clumsily. Not in a way that triggered any standard alert. She had been using his own login credentials, entered on his own devices at times when he was sleeping or distracted. She had been copying proprietary technology files, development blueprints, research data, encrypted contracts with defense and infrastructure clients, and transferring them to an external encrypted drive. The files were worth more than Ethan's estate. She was not planning to inherit his money. She was planning to walk out of his house with technology that foreign buyers had apparently already agreed to purchase, leaving behind a dead man whose death would be recorded as a heart attack and whose assets would take months to untangle. By the time anyone looked closely, she would be unreachable. Marcus, would be with her. He had been the inside man from the beginning. Not a grieving brother who had been recruited. A co-architect. He had taken the estate manager position specifically to gain access, and he had done it 2 years before Vanessa ever appeared at the charity event. They had planned this for a long time. Ethan called his lawyers. He called the detective inspector he had met through a corporate security consultation 2 years ago. He called 3 of his most senior executives and told them exactly enough. And then he did the thing that Damien had quietly suggested and that Ethan, after a long pause, had agreed was the right move. He did nothing visible. He let the days continue. He slowed down. He walked with a slight heaviness in his step that had not been there before. He canceled 2 meetings that had been in his diary for weeks. He asked Vanessa to sit with him while he reviewed some documents, saying he was having trouble concentrating, and she sat beside him with her hand on his arm and her eyes calm, and he let her. He started mentioning his will. Casually. The way a tired man mentions the things he usually avoids. He said he should probably update it. He said he had been thinking about what he wanted to happen to the estate. He watched Vanessa's face as he said these things, and her face showed the right amount of gentle concern with exactly the wrong amount of something else underneath it. The recorder in Nia's backpack captured the conversation in the kitchen 2 mornings before the end. Martin's voice. She's convinced it's working. Vanessa, he looks terrible. Genuinely. I almost feel. A pause. No. Another week. His heart won't survive much longer. The files are already copied. I just need to verify the buyer's transfer confirmation. Martin, and the girl. A silence that lasted 5 seconds. She doesn't know enough. And even if she did, who would believe an 11-year-old housekeeper's daughter over? She stopped. We're almost done. On a Thursday evening, 12 days after the morning with the glass, Ethan Crawford sent invitations to a gathering at the estate. He framed it as an informal briefing. Lawyers, senior staff, his head of security, 2 company board members. He told Vanessa it was related to the will, that he wanted the right people present to understand his wishes. She dressed carefully. She was composed in the way she was always composed. Warm, attentive, standing slightly behind Ethan's left shoulder as people arrived, the way a good partner stands, present but deferential. Martin greeted each arrival at the door. Ethan watched them both and kept his face the way he had kept his face for 12 days. Which was tired and soft and unguarded. The room filled. 16 people. The lawyers sat near the window. The board members stood near the bookshelves. Mrs. Okafor stood near the kitchen entrance, her hands clasped, not sure why she had been asked to attend but present because Mr. Crawford had specifically asked her to bring Nia. Nia stood beside her mother. She did not look at Miss Vanessa. Ethan moved to the center of the room. Thank you all for coming, he said. I know this is unusual. I want to show you something. He picked up a small remote. Every screen in the room came on simultaneously. The large display above the fireplace, the 2 monitors on the wall by the study door, the screen in the corridor visible through the open archway. The footage ran without narration. It did not need any. Vanessa at 2:13 in the morning in the medicine room opening capsules. The clear bottle. The drops. The phone call audio playing clearly over the room's speakers. His heart should give out naturally. Martin at the security panel. The 4-minute gap. The delivery at the garden wall. The kitchen conversation. The timeline. The threat to Nia in the hallway, caught by the recorder, her exact words playing back in her own voice in a room full of people listening to every syllable. Ethan watched Vanessa's face as her own voice filled the room. She held it together for longer than he expected. He would think about that afterward. The specific resilience of someone who had spent years maintaining a face in rooms where everything was at stake. She stood very still and her expression passed through several things quickly before settling into the version she had apparently decided was her best remaining option, which was injured denial. "This is fabricated," she said. Her voice was steady. "You've set this up. Someone has manipulated this footage." Martin moved toward the back of the room. He did not run. He walked, with the careful, deliberate movement of someone hoping to be inconspicuous, toward the corridor that led to the garden exit. The 2 officers waiting in the corridor stepped forward before he reached the doorway. Vanessa watched this happen. Something in her face changed. Not collapse, she was not a person who collapsed. But a specific stillness arrived, the kind that comes when a person has run every remaining calculation and found no route. Ethan walked to the kitchen island. On it sat 2 identical glasses of orange juice. Both freshly prepared that morning. One was the glass Vanessa had made for him as usual, collected discreetly by Damien before it reached Ethan and replaced on the counter. The other contained only juice. He picked up the glass that Vanessa had prepared. He carried it to where she was standing. He set it on the table in front of her. He said nothing. He did not need to. She looked at the glass. She looked at him. The room was perfectly quiet. He did not touch it. The silence that followed said everything that needed to be said, and it said it in front of 16 witnesses and 3 lawyers and 2 police officers and a forensics report that had already been submitted to the prosecutor's office that afternoon. Vanessa Hale and Marcus Hale were charged on 7 counts between them: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, evidence tampering, unlawful access to proprietary systems, criminal threats, and theft of trade secrets. The trial lasted 11 weeks. Both were convicted on all counts. The judge, during sentencing, described the case as one of the most calculated acts of premeditated harm she had encountered in 20 years on the bench. Ethan Crawford underwent a full course of treatment over the following 4 months. The compound had done real damage. Not irreversible, but the kind that required time and specific intervention and a period of enforced stillness that a man like Ethan did not experience naturally. He slept more than he had in years. He walked in the garden in the mornings without his phone. He read books he had been meaning to read for a decade. He was, his doctor told him, fortunate in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. He knew that. When he was strong enough to hold a proper staff meeting, not a company meeting, a household meeting, something he had never called before, he asked everyone who worked at the estate to sit at the long table in the dining room. He thanked them for their patience and for their discretion. He made several announcements about changes to the household structure. Mrs. Adiz Okafor was appointed head of household operations for the entire Crawford estate, a newly created role that came with a formal salary increase, a written contract, and the kind of institutional security that meant her position could not be revoked by anyone except Ethan Crawford himself. She cried. She pressed her hands over her mouth. She said very quietly that she could not accept something so large. Ethan said she could. He had also established a private education fund through his foundation. The first recipient of the annual scholarship, which covered full private school tuition through university graduation, was a girl in year 6 with a reading level 4 years above her grade and a habit of noticing things that grown adults walked past every day. Nia received the letter 3 days later. She read it twice. She sat with it in her lap for a long time. Then she folded it neatly and put it in the front pocket of her school backpack. The same backpack that had carried a small recorder through the most dangerous weeks of her life. And she went back to her homework. At a quiet dinner at the estate the following week, Ethan raised his glass across the table and looked at her. "Everyone believed the woman who looked after me," he said. "I survived because I finally listened to the little girl everyone ignored." Nia looked at her plate. A small smile arrived, the real kind, and she let it stay. 3 weeks after that dinner, Damien Ross arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. Ethan was in the garden when the car came through the gate. He watched Damien cross the lawn toward him and knew immediately from the way he walked that what he was carrying was not good news. Damien handed him a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small black flash drive. "We pulled this from Martin's office during the final evidence sweep," Damien said. "The encryption took us a while. I wanted to be certain before I brought it to you." Ethan opened the bag. He turned the drive over in his hand. It was small and unremarkable and absolutely ordinary looking. "What's on it?" he asked. Damien looked at him steadily. "A list," he said. 5 names. All billionaires. All in this country." He paused. Each one marked with the same notation. Ethan waited. "Next," said Damien. The garden was very quiet. A bird moved somewhere in the far hedge. The morning light lay flat and gold across the wet grass. Ethan Crawford stood with the drive in his hand and felt the specific weight of something that had not finished yet. Something larger than one woman and one brother and one mansion and one man's survival. Something that had been running in the dark long before Vanessa Hale walked into a charity event and smiled at him across a room. He looked at the drive. He looked at Damien. "Send me the names," he said. And the morning held its breath.